Dear Wargaming, you have ruined the game in many ways, and currently, I would say World of Tanks Blitz is in the worst state it has ever been in. In today's video, I'll be explaining why that is the case, and how you have single-handedly managed to ruin most of the virtues that you originally set the game up to be. And, yeah, that's as simple as it is. If you disagree with what I'm saying here, then read the comments. Let's see how many people agree with me versus agree with your decisions as a company. Let's get straight into it. And I can tell you what the biggest reason why I have less enjoyment playing Blitz now than I have in the past, and that's the stupid equipment changes they put into the game. These equipment changes are the worst balance decisions they have ever made. Normally when Wargaming rebalances the game, they look at tier 10, tier 9, tier 8, and they look at each individual tank and they're like, okay, we need to change this vehicle this way, we need to change that tank that way, and they individually balance them. Now, they don't do a great job at it, but at least they put in the effort of choosing what happens to each tank and thinking of the implications behind it. When it comes to the equipment changes, they had no clue what they were doing, because there are over 500 tanks in the game, and these changes affect each one of those vehicles differently, and they have no clue how these actually come out to result the game. And that's where we arrive to the problems. Let's start off with gun rammer and calibrated shells. Gun rammer went from a 7% DPM buff to a 5% DPM buff. This is pretty important because essentially they said, oh, look, all the vehicles that you were running gun rammer on before, that's useless. Especially because we're going to buff calibrated shells. We're going to give AP and heat 3% more penetration, but for some reason leave APCR at the same 5%. This is the worst decision I've ever seen in my life, because there's a lot of tanks that are balanced around armor. And Wargaming said, nah, we're going to ruin that. We're going to say all that armor that you had, bye-bye. First of all, the AP pen buff of 3% is huge. People focus on the heat pen buff, but the fact that most tanks now have an insane amount of standard pen means that you barely even have to load gold in most situations. You can cut through an IS-4 upper plate without any effort. You can penetrate most opponents with just AP ammo now. I mean, heck, the VK90 has 299 mils of AP pen. It's stupid. But it gets even worse when you take a look at the heat pen buff, because now most mediums have 340 mils of heat pen. I'm looking at a leopard here. This is 340 mils of heat. That means a leopard can now cut through armor that it wasn't meant to, like an E100 turret, reliably. It can cut through most heavy tank frontal plates, like a Type 71, reliably. Why did Wargaming think that making mediums have enough pen to cut through heavies reliably was a good idea? I don't know. In my opinion, the whole point of a medium is to trade pen for damage per minute so that you can use your mobility to get to the side of slower tanks and farm them out. Not so that you can just sit hull down in your M48 Patton and absolutely farm a heavy that can't fight you. That's a stupid decision. Then we arrive to the fact that Wargaming nerfed improved assembly and enhanced armor. Enhanced armor used to be a 4% armor buff. Now it's a 3% armor buff. That means 25% of enhanced armor's capabilities were stripped away. And same thing for improved assembly. 6% to 4% extra HP, meaning that heavies once again get hit hardest the most, because heavies used to have a lot of HP and now have a little bit less. All of these changes, less armor on your vehicles, paired with more penetration on every vehicle, basically means that heavy tanks now are less effective than ever when it comes to doing what they're meant to, getting bounces and holding. That's the first problem that we arrive to. These equipment changes were terrible. But then it gets even worse, because Wargaming also put the refined gun buff. They made it so that refined gun gives you a 15% better dispersion value, which means that all tank destroyers and vehicles at camp now have an even better time of hitting you. And not only that, but they also made it so enhanced gun laying drive gives you a 15% aiming time buff instead of a 10%. So basically, you can run refined gun, and you don't even have to run V-stabs because the aiming time buff evened out the changes. So you can run refined gun on a vehicle, let's say like an FE2 and 5B183, and you can have 0.339 dispersion, which means that you are more accurate than most heavies in this tank now. And you can sit in the back of the map with, oh yeah, that's right, 324 mils of AP pen because they buffed calibrated shells AP pen. So you can cut through 99% of armor frontally with AP. You can hit most opponents now across the map. It's stupid. And they've done this for all tank destroyers. Tank destroyers do not need more pen. I mean, you look at a tank like a Hori, and now it's 410 mils of AP premium because they buffed heat and AP. The Foch has 420 mils of premium pen. Why are we buffing penetration values on tanks that don't need pen buffs? The only round that really needed a pen buff was possibly APCR, because they keep giving it as a standard shell to most tanks. Yet they only buffed AP and not APCR. Not that it should have gotten a buff to begin with, but that's the first problem. These equipment changes are the worst thing ever. And it gets worse because we arrive to Camouflage Net. Camo Net used to be the same buff for every tank. It used to be a flat 10% concealment buff, and then it would be like an extra little, I don't remember exactly what the buff was, but it was a flat same buff for every single vehicle, which was good because it made it fair for every tank you put it on. What Wargaming has done now is they've made improved optics and Camouflage Net entirely dependent on what tank you're driving. For example, a 268 version 4 has to run Camo Net because it gives you a 10% concealment bonus to the tank when moving, and it doubles it when you're sitting still. If you compare that to, for example, a medium tank or a heavy tank, it's a big difference. For a heavy tank, you get a 2% concealment buff while the tank is moving. In other words, it's completely useless to run Camo Net on a heavy, so you have to run View Range. But View Range was also nerfed. It used to be a 10% buff, now it's a 6% buff for heavies. So heavies now have 4% worse View Range than they used to, and they can't run Camo Net at all. So they just got a flat nerf to their overall View Range, while tank destroyers have much better camo. Yeah, that makes sense. And then you have mediums, and mediums also got a flat nerf because mediums don't get as big of a buff as, look at it, it's only a 4% buff to concealment for mediums, and the view range is 8%, which used to be 10%. So literally what Wargaming has done here is they've made it so that tank destroyers get the biggest buff. Tank destroyers gain 10% camo. I was playing in my, I don't remember what it was, we'll say a Leopard 1 earlier today, and there was a tier 9 Ho-Ri, and it was sitting on a ridgeline in the open, and nothing spotted me. I drive a little bit over the crest of the ridge to shoot at a tank on the other side of the map, and the Ho-Ri spots me, shoots me, and doesn't get detected until it shoots me. That is right. Tank destroyers now have the ability to outspot mediums. The Ho-Ri was not in a bush. It was sitting flat in the open. It was on my live stream. The fact that it is now possible for tank destroyers to sit directly in the open without any cover from a bush, outspot mediums because of the camo values they feature, is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. The whole point of mediums and light tanks are to outspot tank destroyers if they're not in bushes and punish them. But now Wargaming has completely skewed the values, and now tank destroyers outspot mediums. You might as well just use a tank destroyer frontline because you'll probably outspot half the mediums you find. It's mind-boggling, these decisions that Wargaming has put into the game. It really is. And what's even crazier is that Wargaming only nerfed the view range to tier 10 tank destroyers. Notice how I mentioned a tier 9 tank destroyer. Well, that's because Wargaming nerfed the values, as I said, to only tier 10 tank destroyers on view range. If you look at a 268, it has 263 meters of view range. But if you look at a tier 9 tank destroyer, like the 704, this tank has 274 meters of view range. Yes, yes. Good job, Wargaming! Whoa! Yeah, what they did is they nerfed the view range of tier 10 tank destroyers, thinking, okay, if we buff the camo, we should nerf the view range. But their tiny little pea-brains forgot that all the other tiers in the game exist. So they left the tier 9, tier 8, tier 7, and tier 6 tank destroyers view range the same. So in other words, all tank destroyers at tier 9 and below now outspot every heavy tank, every light tank, and every medium tank. Great job, Wargaming. Truly a spectacular job. Your genius just always manages to exceed it. It's just incredible. It is truly incredible. Yeah, all the tier, look at all the tier 10 tank destroyers. Look at a, it doesn't really matter. I mean, any tank destroyer. Look at a Grill, for example. And the Grill has 263 meters of view range. You look at any tier 9 tank destroyer, a Tortoise, and the vehicle has 274 meters of view range. A Ritter, the tank has 274. That is 10 meters of extra view range on tier 9s, which basically means now that when you're playing in lower tiers like tier 6, you can have tank destroyers. I want you to think about this for a second, right? In tier 6, let's say the Cryos, for example. The Cryos has 87% camo when sitting still. And not only that, but it has 252 meters of view range, right? Compare that to, well, it's technically 240 because obviously you're going to be running camo. But compare that to the Frosty. This is 270 meters of view range, okay? So think about that. This tank has about 20 meters more view range than a Cryos, but its camo is 30% worse. It's not even close. You will never, ever, ever spot a Cryos in your, like, if you were at this far away, the Cryos will always spot you first. It's the dumbest thing ever. It really is. Wargaming has completely screwed everything up with these latest changes. Tank destroyers now outspot heavies, mediums, and it just... The whole point of tank destroyers is to support the team and rely on the team. And now tank destroyers don't need to because they can spot for themselves. It's crazy. It is really, really crazy. And it has destroyed most of the basic fundamentals of the game. On World of Tanks PC, tank destroyers have very little view range, apart from very, very unique ones like the Super Hellcat, but that makes up for it in other areas. But the point being, most tank destroyers on PC have to run really good camo and only work well when in a bush. But in Blitz, well, now tank destroyers have the ability to outspot mediums, outspot heavies, outspot tank, like light tanks. It's crazy. It really is. I seriously do not understand what Wargaming was thinking when they did this to the game. So good job, I guess. And then we also add into the fact that Wargaming keeps buffing tanks that don't need buffs and nerfing tanks that shouldn't get nerfed. A great example of this would be something like the Leopard and the, how about E50M, right? The E50M was really good in the previous update. And they said, you know what, let's buff it again, because it needs reactive armor and more DPM and more armor, clearly. The Leopard 1 was a fantastic tank last year, and they said, you know what, it's not good enough. Let's keep the DPM the same, but give it gear oil. That way it can now reverse at faster speeds than light tanks. And let's also give it adaptive concealment. That way it can outspot and know when it's being detected. They keep buffing tanks that don't need buffs, and they're nerfing tanks that shouldn't get nerfed. The M48 Patton is probably the best medium in the game right now because of the fact they gave it gear oil for some reason, and they gave it reactive armor. They buffed the Sheridan's Alpha for some reason. They keep buffing the Concept 1B's DPM for some reason. Like, I just... Right now, Wargaming is getting me really angry because the decision-making they're putting into the game is equivalent to that of somebody who simply does not know what their game is based off of. So I hope Wargaming sees this video. I hope they do. And I hope the CCs talk about this, which they probably won't. But I really do hope that at least this video gets some sort of, exposure. Because to me, Wargaming has done an absolutely terrible job at balancing their game. If they revert the equipment changes, most of the issues that I have will be fixed. Will they? No, there's no way they will, because they never admit that they make mistakes. It's just as simple as that. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.